So I think one of the most important things from this group is bringing people together who were pretty contentious when they were apart, in my experience and what I was told from the past, and bringing them together, and we can all talk like civil, normal humans around the table. I mean, I think, and not to say that we aren't those people, but there was conflict before.
For sure.
And I think there's been a foundation of trust that's built. Yeah. I think that is super important. It has very little to do with actual bears,
right,
but I think it will go a long way to help with achieving our objectives around bear management, because it's all about people. It's all about working together. Yeah. And I think building a solid foundation, bringing people together, sharing and co-learning, I think is really important.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff. On this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. So today's episode, I managed to get a hold of Courtney Hughes. Courtney Hughes is a conservation social scientist for the government of Alberta, and she headed up this program. It's called the Northwest Grizzly Bear Program, and what it was is a collaboration of multiple stakeholders that all came together to discuss grizzly bears in the northwest part of the province, so around the Peace River area and north of there. And it's an area where there wasn't a whole lot of information regarding grizzly bear population numbers and kind of the challenges that exist up there. So yeah, they came together and they created an awesome amount of collaboration and really worked together to find some common goals, some common threads to try and sort out, how we can learn to live with grizzly bears a little better, right? So it was really, really cool. It was an awesome conversation. Courtney really, she really kept the whole conversation going because I don't know where my brain was. I guess I was tired. I don't know what happened, but it was embarrassing to say the least. So I apologize for my ineptitude when it comes to, putting words together, kind of like how I'm having problems right now. But, regardless of how confusing my questions were, Courtney managed to find something good to say. So it was really, really good. She really knows her stuff and really understands the social aspect of grizzly bear. She doesn't like the word management. So I'm going to say grizzly bear coexistence. So yeah, the social side of it's a little more interesting. So we didn't really discuss about population numbers and that kind of stuff, more just about the interaction between humans and grizzlies and how that's been problematic in the past, how we can maybe work towards something different, better. It was awesome. You guys are going to love it. Really, really cool conversation. Thanks, Courtney, for pulling this one ahead because I seemed incapable. Sponsors for this episode. Number one sponsor for 2019 is West Fraser. I couldn't appreciate their support enough. It really allowed me to do a lot and get this podcast out there for other people to hear. So I appreciate their support. Also, secondary sponsor, Green Lake Forestry, has been a sponsor since the beginning. And again, couldn't have done this without them. So thank you. And Damage Timber. Damage Timber is an apparel company out of Edmonton here. They're supporting environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. So you can go to damagetimber.com. You buy their clothes online there, and 10% of everything they sell goes towards an environmental sciences scholarship for students going to environmental sciences, whether it's a trade school or whatever. But check them out. Put in Your Forest 10 at checkout. You can get 10% off. So yeah, without any further messing around, let's jump right into it, talking about the social aspect of grizzly bears with Courtney Hughes. And here we go. Awesome. So I guess, I was trying to get into the frame of mind of talking about like the social aspect of grizzly bears and that kind of thing. And I'm not, I listen to other podcasts where they've discussed kind of the social aspects of stuff like that. Not necessarily grizzly bears, but other animals, right? Yeah. And I was trying to get into the mind of it. And I was, all I could really think about was like the grizzly bears like the common thread that I see, right, is that grizzly bears are one of those megafauna that people just kind of see as, I don't know, we covet them somehow, right? Like they're people see them as almost like the last remnant of a like, you know, the great megafauna or something like that. You know what I mean? There's like almost a spiritual kind of longing for seeing bears and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering, going into your education and how you got into this, if that played a role into it, or if it was more of a practical side of it. I'm guessing it probably did, but
absolutely.
Yeah,
that's a good question. So yeah, I think I tend to agree that some groups of people see grizzly bears in this kind of iconic, rugged wilderness, relic of, kind of an old world, maybe. I would say in North America, because at least that's my experience. Perhaps that's also elsewhere in the world, as some literature would probably show. And I think for sure I think it would be unwise of me to say there wasn't like a bias, right, for some kind of affiliation or connection that I have to big, large, charismatic megafauna.
They're just cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a grizzly bear. Like
and you anthropomorphize them, right? You attribute human kind of emotions or terms and concepts to them. I mean, maternal love and, fierce protective mother, or this like big, ferocious, like aggressive male bear, or, the big, the names that we kind of give these bears to, like Big Ben or whatever. I mean, I think I'd be lying to say there wasn't some kind of connection.
For sure. There's always something there, right? And so, and like you already kind of mentioned what my next thing that I was thinking about was, there a lot of people, there is that there's that iconic kind of idea of it, right? But there obviously is, and you know this through your work, multiple different perspectives on what grizzly bears are and how we interact with them, right? So I thought it'd be interesting just to go through quickly your all the different viewpoints that you've come across, and we'll get into like the focus group and all the work, and we'll get into all of that. This is just kind of prep for it. All the different views that you've come across, right? Because like for me, I see that, that kind of people that visit parks view, right? I think everyone visits parks. Parks are great, but you know what I mean? Like the city person who maybe doesn't experience wilderness in any way that they, besides being in the park, right? There's that view of like, oh, cool, a grizzly bear, let me get up and take a photo for Instagram or whatever, right? And then there's the farmer who has to deal with it, taking out cattle or digging big ruts and taking out his machinery or whatever, right? And then there's the people that live in the interface who have that. So I wanted to see what other perspectives out there that you see that you thought were, made up the gamut, because I think for a lot of people that just in the city and that kind of stuff, that they just see them as like, they're cool, they're like wolves, right? Like they're just awesome, they're really iconic and all this stuff. So like what are the different perspectives that you've come across? So
you touched on some of them. I mean, it runs kind of this gamut, or this this scale of different perspectives, and it depends on your lived experience. It depends on the context that you're experiencing bears, whether it's a daily life as a rancher, or if you're a crop farmer. Or even if you're just a rural resident on an acreage. I mean, because you can still have bears in your garden pile or your compost, or chasing your dog. And then from an industry perspective, I mean, folks who work in the forestry sector or the petroleum sector, I mean, they're also experiencing grizzly bears depending on where they are. Bears walk roads because it's easy, or other open linear features.
Same as everything else.
Absolutely. And there's often food that they can, nibble along the way. So, and that's where people are. So people have this range of experience with grizzly bears. And the interesting thing that I found in my research is that there was multiple perspectives held at the same time, which I don't think would be anything kind of surprising. No. But I do think that sometimes there's this perception that, ranchers or anyone in the industry kind of, or forestry sector, they just dislike wildlife, right? And that's not true. Of course I mean, people are people, and they have these really transformational experiences no matter who they are. And it can be good or bad. They can be positive or negative experiences. And so this multitude of perspectives really depends on how you're kind of situationally experiencing a grizzly bear in a point in time. A rancher can enjoy watching a mother and cubs frolic, in their back 40, provided it's not, creating a safety threat for their kids or themselves, or, you know, killing their calves or destroying grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird dynamic, right? Because it's almost regional, it seems like, but then like you said, exactly, right? Like it's totally specific to the situation, right? Like so I guess I'm not sure what I was trying to achieve by asking that question, but
well, and you're also right. Like what I also found, or at least what I suggest in some of my work, was after interviewing a variety of different individuals across the province, there is regional differences.
Yeah.
So at least in Alberta, I mean, I don't want to speak to where all the places grizzly bears occur in Canada or the world, but there was regional differences based on who was experiencing a bear, what their kind of primary livelihood type was.
Right.
Up in the north, we have this kind of frontier perspective. It's still pretty low human density where I live. And, you know, when you see people, it's usually because they're in some kind of industry capacity or if they're on that agricultural interface. Whereas down south, there's more long-standing ranches that have been there, you know, for decades.
Right.
And, you know, folks have experienced bears you know, through stories that their granddaddy's granddaddy told them from that homesteading culture. So there are regional differences in Alberta. And then, you know, as you mentioned earlier, the urban perspective and how people from urban areas might experience a grizzly bear is very different from other folks who are kind of living that daily life.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that, I think like some common, I would assume would be misperception would be that a lot of the grizzly bear conservation or just conservation movement in general would be from like more urban, and you know, people consider like the metro urban to be more, you know, conscious of social issues and that kind of stuff, right? And people be like, oh yeah, well it's the stupid city folk you wanted to you know, needing something we don't need, right? Do you think that's true, or do you think it's personally, like, I'm a hunter. It seems like it's pretty much everywhere, right? We all want grizzly bears. We all want wolves. We all want the full gamut of you know, the ecology for you know, biodiversity and ecological richness, right? But it's you have stories like Bear 148 down in Banff, right?
Yeah,
and it's all very emotional and there's a lot of perspectives to that, right? And then you have places like where you're up in Peace River, where most bears probably don't have a name. They probably, you know what I mean? They're just part of the wildlife, a part of the ecology. And how do we balance the difference between those two? And then the third, which is like, you know, the problem animals, and calling them problem animals in and of itself is problematic. Right? Yeah. So bears are just bears, right? They're just doing what they do. So, I guess.
So you brought up Bear 148 and the emotional framing around Bear 148. And that's interesting because there is a role that media or, you know, just the public or residents or individuals, biologists sometimes, that they play in how they frame and attach to an individual bear, right? It does become this kind of representative of, you know, how we as individuals or groups might feel towards species. Yeah, so I think that's interesting because, you know, to say that it doesn't happen up north, it does, but it's just not publicized. Right. So the role of journalism or media in terms of how you know, bears are framed or human relationships with bears are framed is quite interesting. For sure. And Bear 148 is kind of a good example of that kind of emotional appeal on I don't want to say a softer side, but for lack of a better word, it's more of tugging at the heartstrings of the life of this bear versus the framing of human bear conflict, like, you know, the aggressors attack the farmer, or, you know,
the monster versus the teddy bear.
And it's quite interesting because I think there's a role there that both scientists and journalists can play together to, you know, really think about critically how we're framing our relationship with wildlife and these big toothy critters. And up north in Peace River area or north of that in the Chinchaga, the locals name the bears. Okay, right. So they have their own local name. So when they're calling in to say like, hey, I saw, you know, Ben or whatever, they're naming the bear, you know, he's roaming around again, looks good, but just wanted to let you know, they'll drop us a pin or more recently they're using our Grizz Tracker app, which is cool. Right. We can talk about that. Absolutely. And then in terms of the framing of problem animals, that's so interesting. And there's reams of literature that are trying to tackle this from, you know, an anthropological perspective, from more social science weaving with the conservation. And it's really interesting because how people define it, I think, is influenced by, their own experiences, but also what they're exposed to. So the framing through media or through, interactions with biologists or other scientists. So I think, how we frame problem animals is interesting relative to who we see ourselves as, our position kind of in the natural order of things, which might be a little kind of egocentric, and I think that's probably how humans mostly are. And it's not a bad thing; it just kind of is in some cases. For sure. Versus maybe other cultures. I've had the fortune to work in other countries. I just recently returned from Tanzania, and people's relationships with different wild critters is so different, and yet there's so many common threads. And so problem animals in Tanzania, less so in the area where I'm working, less so the toothy carnivores, less so the leopards and the hyenas, which I think I went in with some assumptions thinking they would be problems.
You generally think of the predators, right? Yeah,
absolutely. When you think problem wildlife, you think conflict with things that can harm people and their livestock or other parts of their livelihood. But it's with elephants. It's with crop raiding elephants. And in some parts, it's with baboons because of crop raiding and also the threat to human safety. And so, it's interesting in terms of how we frame problem animals. Because grizzly bears really, as you said, bears are just being bears. And it's usually our human actions where we, leave out garbage. We have easy, accessible food for bears that creates the problems because bears are driven by mostly food and sex.
Yeah, for sure. Really. Yeah.
Kind of like a teenage boy. I mean,
I don't know if I ever grew out of that.
So I just wanted to touch on those aspects.
No, for sure. We can go into that more. I think, the whole idea of, I guess I'll go back to the first part you said, which was the like Bear 148 and anthropomorphization of bears and that kind of thing. Like you were saying, like even up north where it's mostly a working landscape and not a park landscape, they're naming bears and stuff because we just do that, right? Bears are cool. You want to name them and whatever. So when it comes to that, like personification of bears, do you see that as a net positive or a net negative? Because it's one of those ones, you know what I mean? Like there's, from what I understand, the personification has definitely brought attention to the animal, which has brought in conservation dollars, which has brought in attention, and then there's also the opposite side, which is the in like a park setting or something like that, and people are jumping out of their vehicles to run up and take a photo because they don't understand what they're dealing with, right? I think it's a zoo or something, right?
So tame animals. Yeah.
So what's your perception on that kind of aspect?
I think it's an interesting way to connect. I think naturally people want to connect with the things in their life, whether those are bears or other critters or even inanimate objects, right? Like we have this innate drive as humans to connect.
People name their cars.
Right. And it shows that kind of emotional connection, that affinity. There's probably psychological switches that happen in the brain when you have this kind of love and care and you attribute this value to the thing you're naming. And so I think that's, people get protective up in the Peace region. They get protective over their bears and they want to let us know, working for the government, they want to let us know as the bios responsible in the area so that we can help, ensure these bears are kicking around. And they don't want that information to be shared. Which is kind of interesting. They're protective over these critters. And I think that's a really interesting way to potentially appeal for to make conservation kind of action more appealing for some folks. There has been literature that it kind of examines, these iconic species and naming them and what that does. There's symbols there's bear symbols actually all over the world. We use that icon in so many things because we have this affinity to kind of go back to your first comment about they're this representation of wilderness and, perhaps something that's pristine and untouched from what it was before, this rugged, raw power that we respect on this, in-depth kind of innate subconscious level, potentially.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, we have and to me, I see it as a positive. Like, sure, it can run amok, but for the most part, I think it's done us well in bringing us to, to focus on issues that, people consider grizzly bears to be a umbrella species or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right?
Yep.
So, or species at risk, and so no, I think it's a good thing, but
It can be.
It's interesting to see or to hear people talk very, very negatively about it, right?
I bet, yeah.
Like there's a few different podcasts that I listen to where they're mostly hunters, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about, and I think most of what they're saying though, when they talk poorly about the personification of bears,
Mm-hmm.
is not that it in and of itself is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they don't like people. I think it degrades the idea of bears. I think.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
like, oh, now
okay.
it's a pet instead of this like thing that we put up on a pedestal that we look at.
Interesting. Okay.
I think that's, I don't know. It's
Mhm.
interesting because I think everyone appreciates them and wants them around.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of it's weird. Some people just want them to be that's just the bear. Let's watch it be wild. But as soon as you put a name to it, it almost tarnishes it or something. But
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on the hunting aspect and with folks who are, trophy bear hunters, I think they also have a level of respect for wildlife and for, I think there's a lot of things wrapped up in trophy hunting. And, I've talked to...
big time.
Yeah,
that is
lots.
not a...
It's a very complex topic. It can be kind of uncomfortable for people to tackle.
Absolutely.
I think that in my experience talking to a variety of different trophy hunters, and not just those who would like to see a grizzly bear hunt in Alberta or elsewhere, but, just kind of trophy hunters in general, they're often motivated by the challenge of that hunt, the opportunity to do something that's fairly rare, the opportunity to, be outdoors, to experience, a part of nature that a lot of people don't.
Hunting's the best. I love hunting.
Exactly.
It connects me to nature more than any other thing that I do.
Yeah.
Period.
So
it just is.
And I'm cautious to say that, I'm sure there's always good apples and bad apples in any group of any person anywhere in the world.
You don't say.
But I think that with trophy hunters, I think that, it'd be interesting to talk to them just about what motivates you? Why would you not want to name a bear? What's the personification of a bear do for you? Is it because it's that emotional attachment that it's like, ooh, I just shot Ben.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. And I don't think they're bad folks. They're mostly men from my experience. And the ladies that are out there who trophy hunt, it's not a bad thing. It's just they have their views. And I think that clashes with what other people in certain populations think.
You're tiptoeing so much that I can't
Well,
barely hear you.
I mean, it's a complex topic. And I've talked to folks who are vehemently against trophy hunting, and it's all about value conflict, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you value and how does that make you feel? And it's usually at that like core emotional, gut feeling that affects people. So,
for sure. And that's that's ultimately what's going to rule, right? It's going to be what society thinks of that task, whether it's scientifically or morally or ethically okay, may not be what decides if it's going to happen or not, right? I'm not necessarily for or against. I'm very in the middle when it comes to, I'm like, I see both sides. But it's an interesting one for sure, right?
Yeah,
like,
it is.
Like there is lots of arguments for, lots of arguments against. Most of the arguments against I see are generally, like you said, emotional attachment, that kind of stuff. But it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, absolutely,
for sure. I think when it comes to like naming them and that kind of stuff, I think like I was saying, they kind of almost tarnishes it. It would be the equivalent of like shooting a collared deer or something like that, right? Like, as soon as like it's a collared deer, you're basically like, it's not a wild thing anymore. It's something that's been
handled and
it's been the wilderness has been ruined, right? It's been I think it's almost that, but I don't know. That's just it's who knows?
Yeah.
So I guess we'll get into the problem bear aspect part of it. Where do you see, like, what kind of problems first of all, I guess let's start with that. What kind of problems are bears causing? Like, what are the types of things that you find people are concerned about? Yeah,
I like how you framed it, secondly. In terms of problems, because when we use language like what problems are bears causing, I guess I do have a problem with that because I have to take a step back and go, well, is it the bears are causing the problems? And some may argue with me for sure and say, yeah, bears are the problem. Or are we, within what was bear habitat and now is a human kind of dominated landscape in some places, what are we doing that may be creating the opportunity for problems? So I think it's just a bit of a reframing.
That's what for sure. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That's what I think last time when I was speaking with Scott, he mentioned something about, bear management is not, we're not managing bears. We're
it's
managing
people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always people. We're the ones who are causing the problems. We're the ones that are, I'm totally on board with that. Yeah. Like I said, tired brain, not exactly as articulate as I should be. If you haven't noticed, a lot of pausing.
That's all right. No worries. Yeah. So I think, the concerns that people raise in terms of the challenges of living with bears is,
there you go. I like that.
again, it depends on where you are in the province.
Yeah. Let's break that down. Let's break it down into let's say down south near Calgary, Banff, Canmore area. Okay. And then again, what's going on in a working landscape type.
Yeah.
Situation.
So I'd say, at least in my experience, working with other bear experts in those regions, in that Calgary, so the Banff, Canmore, Kanesas, that K Country area, for sure. You're going to see, the recreational aspect of potential, and some residential in terms of if there's fruiting trees or garbage left out or bird seed, while those areas have taken great strides to be model communities for mitigating those challenges.
Yeah.
There's always issues, but they're pretty on it. They're pretty proactive to address the challenges.
For sure.
Because it's about keeping people safe and keeping bears alive. And so if you keep people safe, bears don't have a reason to wander into human dominated spaces if there's no food reward. So let's keep them out of there. And then, using different hazing techniques to move bears out if they do happen to wander around. That, teenage male bear that's not paying attention and all of a sudden in a backyard.
Sure.
In a working landscape from a ranching perspective, crop farmers, whether it's north or south, you're on that landscape where, it is bear habitat. And bears probably have always been around those areas.
Yeah.
People move in. We bring opportunities for food for bears, and then that's also conflict for people, where people might be put in unsafe situations. Checking cows when they're calving at 2 a.m, and you walk into a grizzly. That's not a good situation.
Yeah.
My dad's a farmer up north. We use electric fencing. It keeps the black bears out, plus all the other critters and the grizzlies that happen to walk by. And so. I think it's that, livestock, crop, storage issue, safety, protection of your livestock, beehives, fencing beehives. There's been great strides in the province to do that as well.
For sure.
And then in the industrial camps, there's been a lot of work done to mitigate, the conflicts and the challenges, especially of people who might not have worked in these remote areas.
Yeah.
Tossing your sandwich crust seems fairly benign, or throwing an apple core, but if you're on a job site and you're doing that and it's repetitive and a bear walks by, they soon learn there's going to be a food reward. Or literally feeding a bear out of your truck window, not a good idea. And there's been great strides.
The fact that you have to say that is hilarious.
Yeah. It happens.
I know, right? That's what it's, yeah.
It happens less and less, which is great. Camps have, bear safety protocols. We work with a lot of companies, and I'll speak to the north on that, but we work with a lot of companies that come to us to say, how can we do this better?
Sure.
Which is really great. And, lots of people out there really do want to have that experience of seeing a bear if they're a tree planting camp, or they're out working on a pipeline, checking sites. But just being aware.
Yeah.
And then carrying, bear spray, air horns, all the safety gear that you normally would, and just keeping your wits about you.
Yeah.
I think those are the challenges, but at the same time, I think there's been great, people know what to do. I think now more than ever, we know what the tools are. It's a matter of motivation or willingness to implement those tools, and then consistency and sustainability of implementing those tools, in my experience.
For sure. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. And well, it totally makes sense. So when it comes to bringing all of those perspectives together, right? And trying to what's the name of the group called again?
Northwest Grizzly Bear Team.
Northwest Grizzly Bear Team. Like I said, I'm
not
thinking of words. I'm not doing words good today. So the idea behind that group, that was to bring multiple stakeholders together, right? And bring these perspectives together to try and get a a more comprehensive view, I guess, or try to get everybody on the same page, I suppose.
So in 2012, before I actually formally moved to Peace River, there was kind of the attempt to bring these different groups, mostly the kind of the industrial landscape in the Chinchaga, so the Grizzly Bear Management Area 1,
Right.
which does border agricultural interface down in that kind of Worsley country. And also, actually, I should say, Manning area. That's also agricultural interface. And so there was attempts to bring the groups together. And then when I moved up there in 2014, I saw that good work that had been started to reconvene that and like really give it a push.
Sure.
And I happen to be fairly persistent and probably some people would say pushy, but I think it's in a good assertive way. And so, bringing different folks together from kind of public member at large representative, the different forestry companies and oil and gas companies that were operating in the area, even ATCO, because they have transmission lines, so they have to go out into to service their areas.
Yep,
and then, some ranchers and trappers, and try to get people who are interested around a table as a working group. How it evolved was that, for the most part, farmers are busy people. And often farmers are also, working for, a company, and they've got a family, and they're a trapper, and they're a hunter, and they wear seriously multiple hats.
Of course.
So what happened was we had representation from mostly the kind of industrial kind of companies in the area. And then we did have a member at large from the public who decided to join, and we were very grateful for that, to give kind of that broad, was a hunter, was a multiple hat kind of guy. Yeah. So it was really good.
That's awesome. So what was the catalyst for this needing to happen?
So Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan.
Right. Yes.
So in Alberta, grizzly bears have been listed as a threatened species formally since 2010 was the designation. Previous to that, 2008 was when the recovery plan was drafted and developed. Okay. And so there was some knowledge gaps, and the industrial operators across the landscape, forestry and petroleum for the most part, said, we've got these objectives we have to meet, but we have no data to help guide our management. And so we'd really like to fill some of these gaps. And number one being the population inventory.
Right. Yeah. And so you guys did a bunch of work regarding that, and are still doing that? You're still doing that?
So now we're just finishing and polishing up that report, and should be available soon.
Awesome. Cool. So that was all kinds of, what do you call it? Hair sample traps, and then a bunch of other stuff to try, and the Grizz Tracker app. Yeah. Which is, we'll explain that real quick for people that want to,
So for the population inventory, we did use spatially explicit capture-recapture method. So that's the DNA hair corrals. So collecting the hair, analyze, understand the bear. Then you have your population inventory in a nutshell. And then the added bonus to that was we would have operators across the landscape, forestry crews, whomever, even our own government staff who are out on the landscape. They would, call, text, email, leave a note in a windshield of a bear sighting, of scat they were collecting, of bear hair they had in an envelope from some of the farmers in the area. Yep. And so we wanted to utilize the citizen science effort basically across that landscape and try and, make it systematic. So we had a little bit of a bounds to how we were collecting this in terms of the data that we required to be more useful for our population information. So trend analysis in the future, we hope. And then also automate it to make it easier. So it's on one platform, not a piece of paper or a text or a...
it's all going to one place.
Which we still get. And we appreciate any observations, but we try and funnel folks into using Grizz Tracker. And so, our team, our Northwest Grizzly Bear team, developed this... Well, it was a very lengthy process of developing an app. I am not an app guru, but we enlisted the gurus who can write the application for smartphones. Yep. And so it was available for both Android and iPhones. And it's a free download. It's called Grizz Tracker, and it has, some standardized information there in terms of how to report. You can upload a photo. It's geo-referenced so that we actually know a location.
That's a big one. That's
super key. We also collect. So in terms of how the app works, you basically start a trip. It turns on and it geo-references your location every 15 minutes. There's a ping sent. Oh. So it's anonymous. You're just kind of, participant 102, whatever. There's a name. There's a number. There's no names. so that we don't know who is where. We just know that someone is somewhere. And so basically what it does is helps us understand where people are seeing bears. So the ones as well as the zeros where they're not seeing bears.
Gotcha.
And the coverage of the landscape in terms of what's actually not accessible, because the boreal is wet. If you get a bit of rain, it's pretty difficult to get into a lot of places in the Chinchaga.
For sure.
And so we also have enlisted the support of different helicopter pilots if they happen to be out up in the air, out and out. And then, some of the tree planting crews that are in slightly more remote areas than maybe others would be.
That's awesome. So it's actually tracking them the whole time, and then they just hit the button if they do see some kind of something.
Then they can they can report an actual bear, scat, a rub tree, because we do want to know where those rub objects are, a bear wallow if they do see that, an obvious sign of that. And then what we're trying to do is also expand this so now we can use this across all bear management areas in the province, because we've tested it. The utility, the function of the app itself works. We just have a lower density up in the north.
Sure.
And so
it has help. It has
awesome. It works for all intents and purposes, and so now it's a matter of like getting it out there and using it elsewhere.
Good, awesome. I downloaded it when I first came across this stuff, and I had it. I never turned it on, but I also never came across. I wasn't in Grizzlies. I wasn't up there, so it didn't even matter. I was over here, so it was didn't really matter. But okay, so basically, you were trying to just get an idea of what is actually up in that region, because I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of, from what I've looked at, there's not a lot of information regarding population numbers up in that area.
Absolutely,
so the northeast corner of the province.
Just kind of
northwest. Sorry.
Making systematic and automated again the reporting of where people are seeing bears. So like, do we have kind of crossing locations that are along the Chin Road or other major kind of arteries in that area? Do we have kind of hotspots where we might have potential for conflict? So that egg interface, so far we haven't had the number of observations that would indicate any kind of trend. But the app works, and so I guess that's the important part, is that we all came together, and then part of it is that kind of education piece. So within the app itself, we also have some educational opportunity. And then part of the citizen science process is to bring folks all on the same page so that they understand why, systematic information is important for science, and why we need things like observer effort. Just a random opportunistic sighting is not super helpful in the long term for any kind of trend analysis for grizzly bear population. It's kind of a one-off.
Same beer 5 times in a day, and it's
and if a bear's walking along the road and we get 5 different reports, it's probably the same bear that 5 different people are seeing. But I'm guessing you got something sorted out to figure to and that's where we would use the
crunch all the data.
The observer effort. So that's part of what we're looking to do in the future.
That's awesome. Okay, so bringing together this group and bringing together these perspectives, that's not something that is easily done, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of different ideas of what should and shouldn't be done, based off, I'm guessing, between industry and farmers and the hunters and whatever, right? So how does one go about doing that in a way that's going to be successful, right? Like, because it's I don't feel like it's all that often that you could do something like this and it actually works out.
So I guess that's what draws me. I guess that's why I'm a conservation social scientist. And so there's no one recipe, of course, because people are different. But there's some principles, like, in terms of process, we all got together, identified that we're going to have conflict. In the meetings, we're going to have conflict. We're going to have regular meetings, and we're going to sort out that conflict. We're going to use, terms of reference to guide us to where we want to go. So we all came together agreeing that we have common goals. So I guess part of that process is, understanding what the problem was, coming together with our common goals or objectives, and then from there developing that plan that we can keep referring back to. So we had a terms of reference to guide us. We use consensus-based decision making to try and achieve our objectives. We agree that, again, we're going to have conflict and we're going to be respectful in how we disagree, but also how we try to resolve it, or know that sometimes things are going to be a bit of a parking lot. And that has to be okay in how you do this, because sometimes there is no answer, or there's no answer right now.
For sure. No, that totally makes sense. So I guess the consensus was we're coming together knowing that we want to keep grizzly bears in the landscape, but how do we do that in a way that we're safe and, we're not having problems economically or
Absolutely.
ecologically, or that was, so I guess you start with that and then you work your way down, and the specifics are where things get gritty, I'm sure.
Yeah. And the specifics. So now we're kind of in that point. So since 2014, a lot of the first year of work was really a year of meetings to build those relationships.
Right.
So you have to build, this is where things like the constructs under social capital come into play. So trust, trust is huge. If you don't have trust, you're done.
Sure.
So you have to build that, and that takes a lot of time. Things like exchange of information, people knowing that they can come to this meeting and we're going to share. We're actually going to be transparent in what we share and how we're going to move forward.
Right.
And that was really important, and it still remains important.
Yeah.
But the first year was really just building those relationships and figuring out where we wanted to go, and then how we're going to get there.
Right.
And the second year was, going through the different processes for how do you write the proposal, get them funding to do this work, because it's no small feat.
Yep.
It's not cheap to do this work. Who's going to pay? Who's going to do the work on the ground? Who's the administrative side of things? All of that. And then it was the implementation of the actual Seeker project on the ground, so the population inventory, the Grizz Tracker app, all the while still having these regular meetings. And then, now we're in this phase where we're finishing up reporting, and the next step is the implementation. And so the implementation of the research project is almost easier than the implementation of the practical management side of things.
For sure.
And so,
the research is just, like how many bears are out there and where are they going and
and there's methods to follow, right? There's standardized protocols and methods to follow that are well established in the bear world. And so that's what we did.
Right.
And now the harder part is where there's no methods that are established. How do we make this work with with the data that we have and what we now know about our population? How do we actually put that into practice? What does this mean for how companies operate? What does this mean for things like access management? Yeah. What does this mean for, future population inventory? Yeah.
So you have I'm not going to ask you a number, but like you have an idea of what kind of population is out there. So this is going to be kind of your baseline going forward of not what should or shouldn't be there, but what is there now, and how do we manage that?
Absolutely.
So so what were those implications that like you guys decided, that you came to a conclusion on, that you decided you need to do? Like what did you decide as a group that you needed to do to move forward?
So we're still there.
Yeah, you're still figuring that out.
So we're still figuring that out. But some of the things that we have decided to do, and it's been through a participatory process. So again, social science.
Yeah.
It's all, Scott's right. It's all about managing people and working with people. I dislike the term managing people because we're working with people so that people can identify the opportunities where we can achieve our common goals. And so access management has been, a hot button issue in this province. It's no different up north.
So basically just too much going on out there for linear disturbances going in the same direction to the same place, and we don't need to do all that. There's too much. That's a question for folks. In terms of there is linear disturbance, and it depends on, is it kind of reasonably accessible in all weather conditions? If you get enough rain, can you actually get down there? Especially in the boreal context. So again, framing this around our bear management area. And so with the stakeholders at the table and ourselves as government, we kind of came together to say, so what is actually out there? Like actually, it hasn't been ground truthed in how long? So let's do that. And so that's step one. And we're just finishing that up, which I think will help us to say, okay, so now what? Now we've identified what's out there. We've identified where we have, barriers, whether they're access gates or we've bermed places or, there's actually been rollbacks and we didn't really know because it hasn't, that information hasn't been updated. Right.
So I think that's a really important first step rather than coming at it to say, okay, so there's a problem and here's the problem. We make a bunch of assumptions and we know what happens when people make assumptions.
Yeah.
So I prefer not to. So that's the process we're at right now.
Gotcha.
And then also focusing on reducing human-caused mortality, whether that's direct or indirect, which is also part of the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan, as is access management. And so, continuing on with our educational outreach, but what works with people. So going and telling people you should scolding people that you should do X, Y, and Z to save bears is really not a tactic that works.
For sure.
But keeping people safe
Mm-hmm.
and you also keep bears alive,
Mm-hmm.
that's the strategy that works.
Right.
People's safety has to come first.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things that people can do to maintain their safety. And then
Mhm.
you'll also reduce your potential for conflict with bears.
Right. For
Mhm.
sure. So, I guess the access thing is one of those ones that's the main problem where you have the confrontation with bears or the conflict with bears. Basically that's where you're going to find high mortality of bears, is along where people are traveling and that kind of stuff. So is there an interest in reducing that access, or is it just, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm so all over the place.
No, yeah. So yeah, access is basically a bit of a surrogate or another proxy for where there's potential for human caused mortality.
Right.
Whether it's from vehicle collisions, which, are accidental. I don't think lots of people are specifically trying to wreck their truck. No one wants that. But there's that. There's also potential for poaching. There's, once there's access into an area, people can go and recreate, whether that's
Mhm.
just to go camping for a weekend or hiking, although not a lot of people go to the Boreal for that.
Yeah.
But there is, hunting groups, right?
Sure.
So if you're going out hunting and now you've shot an ungulate and you've gutted it,
Mhm.
potential for conflict.
For sure.
And so
It's kind of like the 90% of shark attacks happen in shallow water. It's like, well, that's where 90% of the people are.
exactly. Yeah. So where people are is where the potential for conflict is. And so reducing that by addressing the access piece.
Yeah.
And that's where potentially we can find some synergies that work for companies as well to say, well, this isn't used, or, we can use this, but it's only seasonal. And here's what we can do to mitigate access into that area.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find those synergies. We haven't really landed on anything yet because we're just wrapping up the
Still sorting it out.
Yeah, the aspect of that.
Mhm.
But then, I think another really important part, again, it's all on relationships. It's all with working with people.
Mhm.
I think having our faces out there as, government staff, or, if it's other folks that are working across the landscape in conservation organizations like Alberta Conservation Association,
Mhm.
or nonprofits that might be working in the area.
Yep.
Having folks interact face to face, especially with more rural communities. I mean, the North, we're kind of a little more rural, but I think even urban folks like people interaction. Humans are a social creature, and having ourselves go out there building relationships builds the trust, builds information exchange, builds opportunity for people to connect. Lots of times people want to air their grievances.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Everyone has, everyone wants to do that.
Yeah.
So having that FaceTime, I think, is really important. So that's where I think, in-person kind of outreach activities or engagement with the public is super important as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It totally makes sense. Just, it's funny how everything comes down to educating the public in the end.
Well, so yeah, and I'm cautious to say educating. So I'm a former educator.
Yeah.
I used to be a science teacher. And I have the great privilege of still teaching sessionally at Oxford University's Wild Crew program. And I even, so my lecture at Oxford is it's all about education, how to do conservation education.
Yeah.
And I'm really cautious about that because that's a pretty elitist perspective on empty vessel, filling empty vessels.
Sure.
Assuming that, and I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm saying
for sure.
when we say we have to educate the public, we're assuming that they don't know anything.
Yeah.
And in my experience, when it concerns bears or even other conflict mitigation techniques, like my recent experience in Tanzania,
Right.
people know what to do.
Sure.
It's a matter of what are the barriers to them doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Do they not value X?
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, grizzly bears.
Sure.
That's not really the case all the time.
Right.
In my PhD research under Scott, I only found one person who said they hate bears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Out of over 60 interviews, one person. That's actually not that many. I would have assumed more, quite frankly.
Right.
So I don't think that it's often a barrier of not having some kind of value for the creature in question, the wildlife in question. I think it's a prioritization aspect. Is this what's more important to me?
Just value based. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's back to values. And I think so I'm cautious in saying we have to educate the public. I do think that educational outreach is important, but often it is teaching skills. Like I found with bear spray, lots of folks are really hesitant to believe in the efficacy of bear spray, despite the research that's out there.
It's super prevalent.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many people who are just like, oh, that's stupid.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay.
and I'm so curious about that. Like, why? And well, because I'm faster if I have, my rifle or my shotgun. It's like, well, okay, so here's the thing. And so I happen to teach a lot of bear spray sessions with another colleague of mine, Lyle Fullerton, up north. And so a strategy that I've started to use, and it's kind of fun, you get a little fitness in it. When we have an empty can of inert spray, I kind of pace myself off, 20 yards or so. And then I run at people and say, if you can holster and spray me, because it's empty, thankfully, and it's inert, so it's just a little bit of like oil and water if there is any spray left. And lots of folks can't, they're fumbling to try and spray me faster than, and I'm not even fast like a bear. Like I can't move like a bear. And so, especially working with landowners, I teach kind of an annual session to agricultural fieldmen and weed inspectors. And it's a lot of fun because people have a good laugh that I'm running at them.
Are you yelling too at the same
sometimes.
time?
Like, but, that I think it's, showing folks that maybe bear spray can give you that extra time. And teaching them the skills of, okay, so now we're going to practice and we're going to practice again. I know other places have fancy bears on a slide. I'd love to have that. You pull the pin and it comes. And they're heavy and cumbersome. But they work, right? They give people that real life experience of this is how fast a bear can move. And
how fast is that?
How fast a bear can run? Pretty much around 40 some odd feet per second. It's
probably quick acceleration.
It's real quick, and it's on a dime. Like you think there's a lot of signs that bears would give you, but I wouldn't. I mean, I see a bear, I'm getting my bear spray ready. I've had to many different times. Thankfully, mostly with black bears, but
for sure. I know a lot of people they have bear spray. Like, oh yeah, I always have bear spray on me. I'm like, well, where on you? Like, in my bag. Like, okay.
And so that's where I think education outreach has lots of opportunity to dispel some myths around, bear behavior, around what bears are all about. Because I think people know a good deal, but there's myths.
For sure.
And then same with bear spray. Like, so it's not really effective if it's not on your person. And here's how to carry it on your person.
Immediately available. I know my father-in-law, he carries it. He has it on a strap across his chest, so it's like the first thing he can grab, right? I'm like, that's really smart because, like you said, right, you're not going to have time to think. It's just go. Like,
your brain telling your hand to move when you're full of adrenaline, and it's too late.
You have a 500-pound chunk of teeth and muscle coming at you. It's like, you're not going to be thinking straight, probably.
You bet.
No, I couldn't imagine like. I guess you hear the argument down in the States, right, where they have people can carry pistols and that kind of stuff. Where like, I'd rather have a pistol than bear spray, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, I get the comfort value is like if I have a pistol, it'll die. If I have bear spray, I'm just spicing myself up or whatever. Right? People say shit like that. And so I could understand down there if you're a competent individual, you're competent with a pistol and in that extreme situation. But I imagine 90% of the people that are out in the bush with a pistol down there probably, they're not ready for that high intensity adrenaline situation. And from what I've looked at, it seems like most people end up shooting themselves in the foot or something. But.
Exactly. I mean, and I think competency is sometimes over exaggerated. And I only say that because, we have to take firearms courses as employees, and the practice is insane, and I don't nearly get out to practice enough. My husband is an RCMP officer and used to teach carbine. He's pretty good. He's pretty darn good. And even he says, like, not many people would be able to. Often because of the adrenaline aspect. And you might have a pistol, but you think it's going to die. And oftentimes you're just going to wound that bear. And now you have an enraged, 500 pounds of teeth and claws coming at you. So and adrenaline goes a long way on both sides, for people and also for injured wildlife. So I would say bear spray is always your first line of defense. And then if you need to once you get to safety, if you need to, have a firearm at the ready, then at least you have that time and that space.
I couldn't imagine trying to point, like I think about out hunting with my rifle and trying to aim a rifle at a charging grizzly bear. Like, there's no way in hell.
Yeah.
There's no way in hell, even a black, like whatever, right? Like, there's no way.
No.
You got a scope on there. You got to, like,
You're trying to hit a bouncing paper cup.
It's not gonna, like, it's just not gonna happen.
No.
Your only opportunity would be as it's like on top of you, and you're like, I can't imagine, like you said, with the adrenaline and everything, like, there's no way. It just makes no sense.
You have to be pretty highly trained, and you have to be practicing that, right? To be able to be that competent, nerves of steel kind of thing. And I know I don't have it, so bear spray it is for me.
For sure. No, especially in Canada, like, you kind of have no other option, right?
No.
Like, it's the way to go. No, I'm all for it, for sure.
Yeah,
and I've only actually recently started to carry it myself. I definitely, as a younger man, had the that kind of ignorant viewpoint of it.
I think it's just ego, and I think that's
I got
normal.
my knife.
Yeah, it's mostly the Revenant. Oh my gosh, don't get me started. But yeah, that's kind of common. I mean, in my experience, there's lots of younger men that are totally comfortable with hiking out in the bush with no bear spray. And recently, actually, it was a black bear, but recently, Peace River, I mean, I'm part of the running club. We go running in the hills. It's a river valley. That's like bear mecca especially for black bears. I mean, and so, recently a friend of mine who is a hunter who went to school to be a conservation officer, encountered a bear, didn't have bear spray, and said it was the scariest thing because it was a female. He came around the corner. She had cubs. She had bluff charged. He was lucky. I mean, and so I'm like,
so he was probably just frozen, I'm guessing.
Yeah, totally. And like, dude, what do you do? You know better.
Yeah.
And so it's all about choices, right? And sometimes people just,
definitely being once a young teenage man, I can tell you that, we're definitely full of ourselves. I think we're pretty awesome, right? Like, we're all action heroes or something. Like, I don't know what the hell that is, but definitely get over your ego and carry something to protect yourself, for sure. Yeah.
There's more, I think, like, through the, through the Alberta Hunters Program and like Hunters Education and even the trapping education. I mean, there's opportunities where I'm seeing that more and more young people are like, nudging their dad to carry carry the bear spray. And it's interesting because working with moms, like working with ladies, they're often the ones saying, scolding their partner for not being safe. And so that's an opportunity as well in terms of educational outreach, is working with the people who have the wherewithal. They know, they have knowledge. It's just kind of either fine-tuning skills or tips and tricks and getting folks to be motivated to do maybe a little better. No, absolutely. Totally makes sense. So for you, what positives did you see coming out of this group that you think are like real tangible results that are going to result in something that is a change in whether it's like policy or just societal perception of this situation, right? So I think one of the most important things from this group is bringing people together who were pretty contentious when they were apart, in my experience and what I was told from the past, and bringing them together, and we can all talk like civil, normal humans around the table. I mean, I think, and not to say that we aren't those people, but there was conflict before. For sure. And I think there's been a foundation of trust that's built. Yeah. I think that is super important. It has very little to do with actual bears, right, but I think it will go a long way to help with achieving our objectives around bear management, because it's all about people. It's all about working together. Yeah. And I think building a solid foundation, bringing people together, sharing and co-learning, I think is really important. Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. It's not this wouldn't have worked if you started a Facebook page. I don't think so. And it definitely wouldn't have worked if we went in and said, thou shalt, because it just sets up, it just, gets everyone's hackles raised and their backs get stiff. And why are you the authority? Right. Yeah. And so going together and saying like, okay, so we all agree that this is a problem. We all want to have these objectives. So how can we get there together? Yeah. I think that's really important. And then from there, I think what's happening is we're also seeing, part of the social network that everyone has, we're seeing this trickle out. So people are hearing about it. We are communicating it through different media forms, or video, and we share news, on our Grizz Tracker website, and we try to be open and transparent. We do educational outreach where I've shared across different communities so far what we've done with the grizzly bear work. Yep. And I think the people who work for the different companies or have different membership, they're sharing it with their networks. Right. So now it's growing. It's out there, and I think that means, people are more aware. They feel like well, okay, we're kind of a part of this.
Yeah.
Our concerns are being heard.
Yeah.
And people actually care.
For sure.
About us.
I think, yeah, absolutely. No, of course.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note too that I think most people in the province wouldn't even have known that there were grizzly bears up in the northwest part of the province,
Nope.
right? Like
Nope.
I was talking when we were talking with Scott Nielsen in the last episode there about grizzly bears, right? Like, everyone has this perception that like grizzly bears are this mountainous species, right? They live only in the mountains. It's like, well, they've kind of been relegated to the mountains because we took over everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting, like that is even starting to be squashed, right? That perception of them being, only in the mountains. They're on the plains, they're in the boreal, they're just wherever they can, find enough food to hang out.
You bet. Yep.
Yeah.
You bet.
So did you see, like, amongst the user groups,
Mm-hmm.
did you see a different perception start to arise? Like, did you start to see those perspectives merge more? Did you start to see the kind of the misperceptions fade away as the group went on?
Yeah, and I think especially the representatives we have in our group, they're all pretty bear savvy. They're reading Scott's work, they're reading Gord Stenhouse's work, they're reading work from BC or even from Scandinavian countries. Like, they're pretty
they know what's up,
on the up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the perspectives coming together really are about that we have these shared goals.
Sure.
And that I think the important part is like that they felt that they were being cared about, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's not just we're trying to do this because all we care about is bears.
Yeah.
We also care about people.
Yeah.
And we know that people are the ones who choose to conserve bears through their actions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think folks feeling like they were actually part of this movement going forward because they were the ones driving it is really important. And I think dispelling the myths was really about getting the North's story out because the Northwest, because a lot of people elsewhere didn't know about grizzly bears in the Northwest, or about the actions being taken to try and conserve and manage grizzly bears in the Northwest.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I guess how do we start to with something like this that is definitely, like, it's groundbreaking in the sense that you're breaking through the barriers of communication, right? And how do we start to develop this elsewhere in the province for not just for grizzly bears, but for other species like caribou or whatever, other species of concern? What kind of advice do you have to people to try and, because I know the user groups are interested. I think the interest is there. It's just having that catalyst to bring everybody together and somebody to run it, right? That's the thing. Like, there needs to be somebody that brings the whole thing together. Otherwise it doesn't really happen, right? What kind of information would you have for people that had an interest in doing something like that elsewhere in the province or Canada or wherever, right?
So I think, I mean, and I hope this doesn't sound like it's my ego or anything, but I do think that there has to be a certain skill in connecting people.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, you can't just be some random person. Yeah. No, you need to know how the human psychology works and how to get people to work together and not feel like, intimidated or cast aside, or, like you said, they're driving this thing. They felt like they were the group, not just, you know what I mean, some cog in the wheel, right?
So I think you need someone who's going to lead. Or at least, co-lead, someone with the skills to, bring people together, not take conflict personally, because often it's about other issues. Sure. It's not an individual's, attack on another individual. See the bigger picture, understand the complexities in the system. So, and that's where, in my opinion, a lot of social science skills come from, especially on the qualitative kind of social science. And as you said, like understanding, human thought processes and emotional drivers and all that stuff, values. And then I also think having some processes in place to collectively come together and define the problem. I mean, I think that's so overlooked. People just say, here's the problem, here's what we're doing in certain groups. And it just doesn't work. You have to have it. Often you'll find that people all share the same ideas, but when you tell someone, well, here's what the problem is, I mean, then you just remove their ability to express themselves. And everyone, it's human nature. We all want to express ourselves. So just having the space, taking the time to do that. And then same for expressing the objectives, expressing how do you measure success for those objectives? I mean, you can use a variety of different techniques to do that. Some things that have been used are, in focus groups or kind of one-on-ones. You can do structured decision-making, participatory processes, interview questions that get to those pieces.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
For sure. Yeah, it's all about, like you were saying, right? It's all about actually getting those interested parties engaged, right? Instead of having the regulator come in and say, like, you're doing this. And it's like, well, they don't understand the context of why that is the case, right? So it's engagement is tough, right? Like people have interest, but they don't necessarily, seeing through the fog of different, values and different perceptions is difficult. So it's funny. You almost need a benevolent person, right? To be able to stay open-minded and see all the corners and allow everyone to speak and allow, it's really, really tough for sure. But I'm glad that you managed to make this work, because it's definitely, I think it's a huge step forward in the right direction, right? Yeah.
Well, and there's also, I mean, so that's where I'll say, I think that's where conservation social science plays a big role because that's what social scientists are trained in, especially if they're taking on qualitative, methodology, is learning how to elicit these values, perceptions, ideas from people in ways that kind of get at those like deeper things. It's not like you can fill out a questionnaire and go like check A, B, or C, right? It's deeper than that. For sure. Questionnaires have their utility, or quantitative methods do, but maybe that's later down the road. And then I think that it's messy. I mean, I'm not perfect, and I'm sure there's been meetings where I've
if you said you were perfect, I'd immediately stop trusting you.
Definitely not perfect. And it's messy, and I think being forthcoming about that and understanding that everyone's going to make mistakes, and even the facilitator is going to go like, oh crap, I should have done this different, or I totally missed this point. I think that just owning that that's part of the process, and being a little forgiving of each other when that happens, and then just try better the next time. I mean,
just keep learning. Like it's funny. You look at like the political spectrum, right? And people go, they're a flip flop, or they change their ideas, and it's like, well, that's how normal, like, functioning adults work. They have a perception, they accrue more data, they change their perception.
Growth.
And it's they change and they get better and more understanding. But like it's funny, hey? Like you definitely need to be able to do that. Otherwise, what are we doing? Like this is never going to go anywhere.
Absolutely.
So like realistically, the whole thing is about living with bears, right? Like, I mean, we ultimately want to live with nature in general, right? But for this for this conversation, bears, specifically grizzly bears. Do you think that there was a large failure in the past to do that appropriately, or do you think like obviously they're a threatened species now, right? So we recognize that it could become lost if some really, you know what I mean, if we were just moved ahead with whatever, right, and didn't take into account their habitat and everything else. But I don't think that's going to happen. Like, we're a very perceptive species. We definitely like to keep everything as much the way it is as much as we can. The idea of living with bears, though, like I don't think people really think about it that way all that much, right? They kind of think of bears as, okay, bears are over here, we're here, but like when you're in that interface, it becomes much more complicated. Do you see that perception, that societal perception? I guess, I mean, this is just with your user group, I guess, but do you see that perception is changing in society? Do you think that we're starting to understand that we need to be, like, we're part of the ecology, the same as the bears, and we need to start being more comprehensive and just paying attention to all the aspects and not just doing what we want all over the place, right?
So kind of two different ways I can answer. Well, they're related ways I can answer that. So as part of my PhD research across the whole province, I think people who are within the grizzly bear range in Alberta, and I'll constrain it to Alberta, already think they live with bears.
Good.
So I think in terms of living with bears, I think people do live with bears.
Right.
And then I think it's interesting you said appropriately, because then it's like, well, who's defining appropriately? And, this is the social science in me. What does that mean and for whom? And I think that, there's some regulatory aspects based on the recovery plan and based on what we're looking at for objectives of how we've defined appropriately coexisting with bears. People might have, members of the public depending on the user group, might have different, and their experiences with bears might have different.
Of course, everyone's going to
thoughts.
have different. Yeah, it's not.
But I think
one size fits all. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I think the central tenet is that, people already think they're living with bears. People, for the most part, want to see bears persist into the future in healthy, reproducing populations. So that means we have to have the habitat to sustain those populations. And people want to be able to experience that. So they want to know that bears exist, but they also want to maybe see a bear. And that opportunity is probably fairly thrilling for most people.
Of course.
And so I think most people will try and make the right, steps that they know. And that's when I come back to people know what the things are that they need to do. It's a matter of addressing the barriers to get them to do those things.
Right. So what are the barriers, do you think?
Sometimes I think it's potentially lack of skill or lack of knowledge, like we talked about with bear spray. Sometimes I think it's financial. It can be quite burdensome if you're, depending on, the scale of your ranch or your farm and the level of impact, and if you're retrofitting granaries or if you're electrifying, calving grounds. Like, it can be cost intensive. And, especially when there's the perception or reality, depending on the population of the bear management unit you're talking about. If there's quote unquote a lot of bears, if someone's frequently dealing with bear conflict, it's also, equally expensive and labor intensive to relocate or translocate bears, depending on the number of times that bear has been kind of an offender, if we're using kind of regulatory kind of language. So but now there are steps in place, there's the conflict matrix that the officers use to assess, the risk and the threat and the potential for reoccurrence of that. And, they follow those guidelines. And I think that has also been something, on a conflict level that, landowners see as effective. In some cases, it's also a matter of capacity. For how many boots on the ground in terms of staff that are out there to deal with these things. And so then I think that's when the topic of, well, then we should, have a season for grizzly bears again so we can address the population problem, which is a perception or reality. I think that's another kind of topic. But also, the concept of addressing those problem individuals. Whether or not that's effective, well, that's another topic for discussion as well. But I mean, there's all these things that are wrapped up into how people see themselves living appropriately with bears.
No, absolutely. That's kind of what I was getting at, right? Is there's so many different angles to it. Like, who decides how many bears should be on the landscape? Who decides where they should be? Who decides? And it's like, well, the bears are going to decide where they should be. Like, we have to decide whether or not we're willing to
tolerate
them there
in certain spaces. And in terms of who decides in terms of population, I mean, classically that's been government biologists based on assessments, and in addition to other research scientists that do this work. And so I think from a science perspective, we have information from a bear biology and ecology perspective. But then I also think, as you said in the very beginning of this conversation, there's also those social parameters for acceptance. And that's the negotiation between the science, the economic kind of feasibility of what we can tolerate. And I think that's what the 2016 draft of the recovery plan, that's what we tried to address in that, is trying to negotiate those spaces for social tolerance, and then what that means for management of bears, which is not an easy task. And I mean, it's not easy anywhere in the world, in my experience, dealing with large carnivore conflict, or now dealing with crop-raiding elephants that I'm embarking on. I mean, it's about social tolerance, enabling people, having a level of most people, especially when they're landowners, accept a certain level of loss, whether it's crops or livestock. And then after that kind of acceptance level, then they want to take action. And I think that's probably pretty reasonable for most people.
Do you think it would be reasonable to say that we should move towards a system of, because like historically, let's say, we know what I mean, we segment off, we've taken over the prairies and stuff like that, and we'll segment off sections of land, like, hey, this is my fence and this is my stuff, and nothing's in here and whatever, right? And we have a similar problem with like pronghorns down south, right? Like, they tend to not jump fences. They can, they don't. And so it causes all kinds of migratory problems for them, right? Do you think it would be fair to say that we can, without a whole lot of negative recourse, like economically, just changing the way we do things a little bit, we could almost adapt to grizzly bears, or adapt to nature a little bit better? You know what I mean? Allow for those corridors a little better. like a previous episode I did was adapting to climate change for the forest industry, right?
Okay.
And they were talking about, in my mind going into it, I was thinking, oh, this is big, like we need to change everything, right? Like everything, because climate change is changing everything, so we need to change everything. But no, it was really very small things, like tools they already had, skills they already had, that just needed to be applied in a slightly different way. And all of a sudden, things become easier and more adaptable, more resilient, right? Do you think that would apply in this situation as well?
I don't know if I understand.
Do you think the whole system needs to change? Like agriculture needs to change, forestry, energy, everything needs to change entirely? Okay. Or is this just something where it's like, hey, this is something that we can tackle relatively, not easily, but like simply, like there's simple solutions, but they just require more data or whatever. But we can tackle this if we just think about it from the bear's perspective more than just from, you know what I mean? Our you know what I mean? Starting to include that problem more seriously into, you know, management decisions, I guess. Yeah.
So I think that they are
basically reducing risk. Can we do this in a reduced risk so that the problems that we have with bears getting hit on the highway or agriculture and calves and that kind of stuff, can we reduce the potential for bears to get into calves or get onto the highway, but still move and in a relatively easy way, right?
Yeah, and that work's being done. Sure. And I think that's the exciting part. And I think that's why it's, you know, you can see the light because it's already happening.
Yeah.
I think that with, you know, reducing conflict with agricultural producers, that's happening. Waterton Biosphere Reserve and the Carnivore Working Group has done exceptional they've done exceptional work on reducing landowner conflict with grizzly bears and other carnivore species.
Awesome.
To help landowners. So, you know, retrofitting granaries and electrifying the farmland based on what they need, you know, not the whole farmland, but, you know, calving grounds or around the granary.
Right.
I think those are exceptional activities in the Kananaskis country area. You know, they've done removing non-native fruiting trees and bushes and bylaws around bird seed and providing education to the public on why this is important so that we can keep you safe, because it would be really terrible to go out and fill your bird feeder when there's a bear underneath it for you. And also we don't want
Instagram, maybe.
Yeah. And then we don't want that bear to die, right? Yeah. Back to that, like keeping people safe so that they can enjoy living in this landscape we share with bears.
It's keeping both safe, really, right? Like it's people and if we do this properly, it's doing both.
Yes. Right? But that I found that framing it, again, it's all about framing, framing it to people because, you know, we're concerned about us. And some people are concerned more about a bear, maybe, than themselves, but not many. And then up north, I mean, again, you know, industrial camps, they're doing lots of education. They're you know, retrofitting their camps if they need to. They're using electric fencing and proper garbage storage. Recreationalists are doing that as well. There's hunter safety training that incorporates, you know, bear awareness. So I think I think that's the exciting part about the grizzly bear kind of challenge is that we know where we need to go. We're taking steps to get there. The challenge is actually evaluating that to then demonstrate that it's working.
So that people can convince themselves to take part.
Like evaluation in conservation is really difficult, especially when it's these, I don't want to say intangible, but like these more nebulous things like educational outreach, because systematic evaluation for educational outreach is really tough and very expensive and timely. And, you know, if you use an experimental design, how do you not educate you know what I mean? Like you have to be thoughtful about it. And we as conservationists often identify the problem, identify the objectives, the strategy to get there, and then do. Especially when it comes to things like education and community-based kind of work. I think that's proving that this is working is a much more challenging job. And I think doing things like this, communicating more that there's a lot going on.
For sure.
And we're doing it. Doing program evaluations, Waterton Biosphere Reserve just completed one through the Carnivore Working Group. And I think that's kind of exciting because they're trying to show that here's what we've done and here's how, from the people who've participated, here's how they perceive it to be effective. I think that's kind of an angle we can take.
Right.
That's where I'm interested in.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, and that's kind of what I thought, right? Is that it's just these are not crazy complicated problems, or they're not crazy complicated solutions to these. It's just a matter of getting people to change their perspective a little bit, or or value something a little bit more, or whatever, right?
Make that behavior switch.
That behavior
switch. Grab the bear spray and put it on a holster on your belt.
Yeah.
Not your backpack.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like not leave it at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Little things like that where it seems so simple, and yet there's still these, other barriers. So I think, it's just that behavior switch.
Yeah. So we can live successfully with bears.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, in places we are. It's working really well, and I think there's less and less issues. And when we do hear about a problem, it's sensationalized. If it does come up, it's splashed in the media, right or wrong. That's just it is, and that's with any species, anywhere, or any kind of problem. I mean, that's the angle, right? Sexy news sells.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. But there's a reason for that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And sometimes it can actually highlight other problems. So it might be an opportunity. I choose to try and see things mostly positive. And so it might be an opportunity to then engage and provide more outreach opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. It's good to hear that this kind of stuff is going on like across all, landscape management and wildlife management. Like there's a lot of incredible work going on. This one in particular is pretty interesting because I don't know. Did you have a template for this going into it? Was there like another user group somewhere else in the world that you were kind of trying to mimic, or was this something that you just kind of you're like, I have an idea, I want to go with it? Yeah.
So the only other, community-based conservation is not a new concept. It's been kicking around for decades.
Of course.
Whether it's been done well or not depends on your definition of what that means.
That's kind of what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know of any other really like successful ones like the way this one seems to be going, right?
Yeah. So this one for our kind of industrial landscape, which also includes that agricultural interface, I think is fairly unique, especially being in the boreal. But I think there's lots of examples. I mean, so in Alberta itself, the Carnivore Working Group through the Waterton Biosphere Reserve is a great example of working with landowners, which is a different landscape, different kind of set of challenges for the most part with large carnivores and grizzly bears. But then there's also work that's happened, in the NWT and in the Yukon, working with Indigenous communities that I think we could look more to, whether it's with carnivores or caribou or, any other species. And then in my experience, I've had the fortune of working in Namibia, traveling through and now working in Tanzania and some other countries. And there's a lot of grassroots movements, but they don't make the journals, if that's what you read. They don't make the journals in any kind of splashy way because it's the softer, qualitative, people skill stuff that's usually in anthropology journals or policy journals. And I think that I'm really excited to see people like yourself reach out to people like me, and because there's lots of people who could share this story of integrating both the biological and the social sciences on conservation challenges.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do, but it's like it's exciting to see the dividends pay off in the end, right? You can see that it's making a difference. So it's awesome. So it's
a long game though, right? It's
Absolutely.
Like it's almost like an epidemiology study where you're like, invest 5 to 10 years and you'll get there. And so that's why I think it's not done much or spoken about much. I don't know. One of those things.
That's a good way to put it though. You're right. It's not like it's not happening. It's just that it's not making front page news, like you said.
Exactly.
It's not sexy. It's not. This is really reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Here's the process we used, and it's lengthy and it's all about trust. It's like, oh, cool. Like
exactly, right? They want to hear about the guy who got his got his leg eaten by a grizzly bear, right?
Like where's the sexy stuff? So,
yeah, exactly. It's so strange. But anyways, is there any kind of final thoughts you have around this whole process or around grizzly bears that you would like to kind of finish off with?
I think I'm just excited to keep on with this process, see if it opens up other opportunities for, grizzly bear work elsewhere in the province or other provinces, or, other wildlife species or other problems. I enjoy doing this work.
For sure.
It's challenging. Sometimes it's hair pulling, but it's fulfilling because it's a long-term investment to try and see something positive between people and on the landscape. So
yeah. And when you can see it making a difference, that's got to be really rewarding.
It is. Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. This is perfect.
You.
And I'm glad I got the opportunity to talk to you because it was, yeah, it's one of those conversations around like, the social aspect of grizzly bears. It's not one that I've ever put a serious amount of time into, right? But when it has come up, in other conversations, you go, oh, that is interesting, right? But it's yeah. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thank
this
you.
is awesome.
Yeah, and if you're interested, we in the future we might want to talk about some of the boreal bat or native bumblebee work we're doing.
Absolutely,
which is kind of cool. So,
totally.
Yeah.
No, we're wide open for any kind of thing that's going on because it's just about environmental sciences and all that stuff, how it all comes together. So I think that would be really good to do too, because I'm guilty of it myself as well, of focusing on like the charismatic megafauna, right? The big, and it's, you're a grizzly bear expert. Like it's, it's also what gets the hits. It's what gets the, right? So, but yeah, bringing in, like talking about the bat or any other number of species that aren't getting that attention, I think that would be, that's awesome. Let's definitely do that.
Bumblebees are a pretty hot topic and they're super fun, and boreal bats, we know nothing about, both species in the north. There's been work, but we're learning more and more. And it's pretty cool because, of course, true to me, we're integrating biological, ecological, social. It's kind of all together. So it's kind of cool.
Like you said, it's all about managing people in the end. Yeah. We're
not working with people.
Managing people is the wrong thing to say. God damn
well, you can say it.
Right. Working with people. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think, saying managing bears working with people. It's funny how it all comes down to that, right? We're like, well, how do we fix this situation? It's like, well, let's fix the people. You don't like that either. No. But let's fix
Let's learn from people and work together.
Yeah, look at you. Yeah, but I think it's safe to say that as a human species, we've made some mistakes.
Sure.
And we could fix those mistakes. And that's generally what we're trying to do with in these situations, is fix the things that we've screwed up as a species. Yeah. Not the individual people, but as a human species.
Society.
Yeah. We did some dumb things. So let's take a step back and redo this.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay.
Cool.
Sweet. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, I apologize for my bumbling ineptitude. Really struggled with the word formation, the sentence formation there. Just seemed to be like the thought popped in my head and then immediately ran away. So I apologize for that, but Courtney did a great job. So thanks again, Courtney. And I hope you guys liked it. Rate and review. Let me know what you think. Shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. And see you guys next time. Take it easy.